Hey guys, Paul from Net Audio here, and we're going to make a standalone video that talks about the Mopar premium audio systems, how they work, how to integrate with them, what's needed, pros, cons, what products and everything to use. There's a lot to pick from. This is a video topic that we've talked about, and I feel like I talk about it a lot, but really from talking to other customers that I spend my life on email and just to be email and messages. So I talk to people all the flipping time, and I feel like I'm having the same conversations over and over and over again. And I'm sending people over to our videos, but it's never like a standalone video. It's always mixed in with different things. It's going to be a heavy topic, but I really want to try to cover all of the bases. Mid-2005, meaning we've been dealing with this type of factory amplified system for 20 years now. Mid-2005, Mopar started rolling out their new Infinity sound system. The way that this sound system worked is instead of having 8 channels, front left, front right, rear left, rear right, you have left and right. So you would pull the radio out, and you can immediately tell if it was the digital version versus the non-digital version because of how many pins were on the amplifier harness. With just a left and a right, what you have, this is called a fixed level audio signal. You just have a left and a right. That signal, if you tap a speaker into this, no matter what you do on your volume knob, steering wheel controls, anything like that, it's just a loud signal. That signal then goes to the factory amplifier, and then the amp is told through data to do volume, fade and balance, EQ, your backup sensor beeps, your navigation prompts, all that stuff is all done through the data network. It took a while for all of that stuff to get kind of hashed out, and if you had a premium system with Infinity, Alpine, or Harman Kardon, or whatever, it was very involved to tie in and to try to replace everything. Once that digital signal went, not digital, once that digitally controlled analog signal went to the factory amplifier, the amp split it all up. The amp says, this is a tweeter signal, these wires only put out highs. This is a mid-range signal, these wires only put out mid-bass. This is a subwoofer signal, it only plays subwoofer. There was no getting full range audio. For you to get full range audio, you had to do signal summing. So signal summing is summing, you're adding, you're just combining channels together. 2005, you would have to take front dash, front door, and subwoofer and combine them in order to get a full range audio signal. You didn't have a subwoofer until 2009, but still, the point is you had to combine these channels together in order to get something usable to send to your new full range amplifiers. In 2009, we started getting into one of the little hot words that gets bounced around, and that's load resistors. What got complicated is the factory amplifiers got smarter, and if you added an interface into it, then the factory amp would say, hang on, something's going on here. So to add an amp, what you're doing is you're essentially cutting the speaker wires in half. You're taking the harness coming out of the amp, you're cutting it in half because we need to send that signal now into our new amplifier. Well, when you cut those wires, now the factory amp is not seeing a speaker. It does not know that there's a speaker there. So the amp says, hang on, something's not right. I'm going to turn off this channel because it doesn't want to damage itself. It's essentially going into protect mode. But it does it like channel for channel, and they can come on and off and do all sorts of stupid stuff. So now we're having to do load resistors, and what a load resistor is doing is keeping those channels happy. It's just enough of a short to control some current for the factory amp to say, okay, I'm doing something here, so everything must be okay, and it still plays audio in order for your processor or your summing device to get an audio signal to put out an audio signal. The complication of that is 2009, they started adding, not all trucks, but they started adding in backup sensors. So if you used any of these devices, front dash, front door, and subwoofer, Well, now you just lost your backup sensors because your backup sensors are on your back doors. They're only behind you and they play through the back doors. So now a 6-channel converter isn't going to work. Well, now you need an 8-channel converter. So it was just complicated. And people did it. It was done. People had their process and they had their methods of the way of doing it. Some shops would tap into the back doors, saying, oh, the back doors are full range. They're not. I have the RTA's screenshots of it that say no, it's not. The back doors only play mid-range. They're not playing full range. People will tap into the back doors and say, here it plays music, and they'll like cheat it and try to fudge stuff, and it never sounds right. And customers call saying, hey, my Bluetooth doesn't play through my speakers anymore. Well, yeah, they tapped into the back doors, and that comes through the fronts. So it is an immediate signal of this is what they did. Fast forward to what the Amp Pro is. Amp Pro, I didn't check my year. I want to say it came out around 17 or 18. So that means that the industry was doing all this stuff for a very long time before this little blessing in a box came out. The Amp Pro installs behind the radio. When it came out, it was not just a standard line-out converter. It's not a converter. I've had customers say that and they think it's just a line-out converter box, and it's not. You can see on the harness, here's your audio inputs, but then you have these wires. This is data in and data out. So what this is doing is this installs behind the radio, takes the data signal from the radio and essentially cuts it in half. It feeds it through the Amp Pro and then back to the factory amp. It takes the audio signal that's the fixed level behind the radio and it interprets that data to give you variable volume. So now it goes up and down off the volume knob. Now it goes up and down off your steering wheel controls. And it creates that signal and feeds it through traditional RCAs for front, rear, and subwoofer. So it makes it just like installing a radio. It's a flat frequency response, front, rear, and sub. Now it also gives us a subwoofer volume knob, and it gives us a remote turn on. So remote turn on, it works just like it's supposed to work. With the subwoofer knob, this does subwoofer volume, but it also allows you to attenuate like your chimes and some different stuff. It's always recommended to install the knob, leave it plugged in. A lot of subwoofer amplifiers on the bass knobs, now they come with a clipping indicator to show you when it's distorting, or they show you voltage levels and protect and all this other stuff. So a lot of people want to use those knobs because it gives them extra information. I totally get it. So this knob still needs to be installed, and it needs to be left turned all the way up just to make sure that this subwoofer output is putting out what it's supposed to be getting. You remove the radio. We have installation videos showing you how to do the installation. You unplug the factory harness. This plugs in line between the factory radio and the factory wiring, and you put it back together. It's that easy. It does have a learning process, but by the time you're done with the rest of the installation, it's going to have learned the truck. It's going to be working like it's supposed to. This makes these obsolete, because for you to do these, like I said, you need at least 8 channels of audio. You're having to do load resistors on all of that stuff. You're having to do the summing, which is, it's not just levels. The summing is you need to have a tool to plug in, and actually you need an RTA to plug in and look at the audio signal. So as you're adjusting levels, you're making it as flat as you can make it, because you're taking 2 mid-range signals and combining them. So it's going to have to be dialed back in order to balance all that stuff out. So this is involved in order to make it all work correctly. And this still is going to use and be affected by all the factory equalization that is built in to the factory amplifier. Should have talked about that a couple minutes ago. So the factory amp, yes, it splits up the audio to tweeter, to woofer, to subwoofer. Each of those channels has time delay. They're crossed over, so they're only limited frequency range, but they also have equalization on each one of those channels. That's what makes these systems sound good to the driver's seat and the passenger seat. If you use these interfaces, you're still getting all the factory equalization, which is also variable. As you go up and down in volume, that equalization changes based off of what the volume of the radio is. So when you do signal summing, even using an RTA and getting stuff flattened out, it's still going to change and fluctuate with the volume. Now you could say, well, I can use a processor, I could use a clean sweep, something with a kicker key processing or whatever to correct that. It doesn't really correct for it because as you go up and down in volume, that equalization still changes. So it can correct for it at that volume level. So say you do the calibration at 30 or 20, it can correct for it there. But then as you change the volume, that EQ is still going to change. With the Amp Pro, it is a flat frequency range, fixed EQ. It doesn't change anything other than volume level. Sound-wise, this works. Installation-wise, this works. Much simpler. It's universal. You don't have other pieces and other tuning and all this stuff you have to deal with. Now, the second half of this conversation, we have our amplifier bypass harnesses that we make. This was all talking Mopar amplified in general. Since 2019, now you have even more amplified audio options. So we make this harness for the 2009 to 18 Rams. We make a Alpine harness and we just, we populate it, extend it, label it, do everything to make it easy for your installation. 19, they complicated things. So 19 and up, you have Alpine and Harman. They use the same connectors, but they're adding and relabeling some of the outputs. And those harness and outputs are different, whether it's a 1500, HD, 2500, 3500, or if it's a Jeep Wrangler or a Jeep Cherokee or Grand Wagoneer, whatever. Same connectors, different wiring configuration. So with our harness, when you order this, you order it and you say, I have a 19 to 22 1500 with Harman Kardon, and I want to use the dash, the doors, and the rear ceiling. And then we configure it and we label it according to that application. So this makes this whole installation plug and play. So you get a brand new truck and you say, I want to replace everything, no problem. We can do the whole install without cutting any wires. It's all plug and play. It's all labeled. It is ready to go for you. So this makes things easy. 25 and up with Harman Kardon and the Klipsch system, that's kind of its own conversation. Exact same principle. Same Amp Pro, same amplifier style of bypass harness, just a lot more options to go over. So we will talk about that later. Hopefully this covered all the bases about this. This is good if it's done correctly. This is still a fix, but for what this cost and what the labor costs, you might as well do this. There's not really an advantage at all to doing the signal summing and all that stuff. There's not really an advantage that I can think of. This gives you a absolute clean slate, gives you variable volume. Oh, okay, so we keep talking about premium audio. We have people who bring up, well, this is a Amp Pro CH41 or CH42 R2, and it's a revision 2. So they get hung up on the revision 2. Whenever the Amp Pros first came out, it was only for you have Alpine or Harman Kardon and I want to add new amplifiers. Revision 2, they changed it so now it can work with the base audio systems. So if you have a base audio truck, whether it's a tradesman without ANC or a truck with ANC, the Amp Pro will still work. Same concept, you remove the radio, you plug it all in, and you move on with your life. The complication is, say you have a 1500 with Harman and you want to add subs right now, but with the intention of, I want to amplify everything later, we're going to point you to the full 6-channel converter, even though you don't need the front and the rear RCA outputs. Because in the long run, it's just smarter use of money instead of you buying a converter now, throwing it away, and then installing this. So in the long run, this is better. So you can install this, hook it all up. The factory system will all still 100% work like expected. It will just give you the RCA output for the subwoofer. Then when you come back later and say, I'm ready to amplify and replace everything, well, now you can run the other RCAs and you can install the amplifier bypass harness and you can finish the install. With the base audio systems, you cannot. What the Amp Pro is doing on the base audio systems, I talked about the data earlier. So what the data is doing now is making the radio think that the truck has premium audio. That's how they're getting the flat frequency range. That's how they're getting the variable volume. So yes, on the base model radios, they have variable volume. Obviously, there's no amp or anything in the way. What it's doing with the data side, though, is it's making it put out that flat frequency range. So even though it's a base audio system, the EQ out of that radio is not flat. It still has some peaks and valleys, and it changes based off of the volume level. This reprograms the radio as if it had Harman or Alpine, so it's a flat frequency range. So what that means is that now the audio signal coming out of the radio, it's not 15 watts. It's not intended to drive speakers. It's intended to feed into an amplifier. So for these, you cannot install it and use it only for a subwoofer. If you have bass audio and you're going to do an Amp Pro, it's all or nothing. If you install it with the intention of only running subs, your door speakers are not going to work. That's the only real downside of using the Amp Pro with a bass audio system. Now, our preference is we use our harnesses that plug in, and we use it with a converter of some sort in order to create RCA signal, because it does allow us to keep the active EQ, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Some people don't like it. We're okay with it. Using the factory harness and factory plugs and all that stuff, we're keeping it more in high level. It has its own advantages as far as signal issues and installation complexity and all that. That really can be a whole other conversation, so we'll just probably shelve that and call that another video topic. Our preference is, if it's premium, if it's Alpine or Harman, we're going to use the Amp Pro. We're going to use our amplifier bypass. If it's bass audio, yes, you can still use the Amp Pro, but it's just not our go-to. I know that was a lot of information, and I told you it's going to be a busy topic. If you have comments or questions, absolutely hit us up, and I will try to clarify things a little bit. Hopefully I didn't step around on my toes too much. So if you have questions, like I said, hit us up, call the shop, shoot us an email, paul@netaudio.com, or you call the shop at 940-767-1800, and we're always here to answer questions and walk you through some things. Other than that, have fun, guys.